Professor Chen. He is actually a dear friend. We've developed a good friendship over the years. I'd also like to say I'm really pleased to be back here in Taiwan. You know, for me, this is just such a wonderful place. I enjoy coming here. You're blessed here with your mountains, the water, the scenery, the climate, and the food. So, and also, I first came actually here in 1983, so I've seen great changes and great progress. I'd also want to thank the organisers for putting this conference on. This is a really important conference, and I think it is so important to reconnect agriculture with the environment and realise that, you know, at the moment in agriculture the environment is the enemy. We're poisoning it, we're flying planes over it to poison it, clearing it, doing everything possible to kill the environment, when actually it's our friend, and we need to look at how we can work with the environment to increase productivity. And I found the presentations yesterday to be very inspiring. I was really glad I sat through the day and I learnt a lot, so thank you. Now, okay, make sure I've got this right. Firstly, about Regeneration International, we're a relatively new organisation, about 3 years old. Dr. Hans Herren, who spoke yesterday, he's one of our founding steering committee members, along with Dr. Vandana Shiva, Ronnie Cummings from the Organic Consumers Association in the USA, and Steve Rye from Macola. And the 5 of us formed it, and we are now, we've got a much bigger steering committee now, but we have something like 130 partnership organisations in 40 countries now. We're growing very, very quickly. The word regeneration is resonating around the planet. What we want to do is promote food and farming systems and land use, and we're using the word food, farming and land use very deliberately. We want to regenerate and stabilise climate systems, the health of the planet, people, communities, culture, local economies, democracy and peace. Farming is more than just producing food. Farmers live in communities and in the environment. We want to work in that, and we want to empower farmers as well. What I want to talk about today is contrast 2 major issues. Pesticides. We had a lot of talk about pesticides in the environment yesterday, but what we need to really talk about is pesticides in us, and particularly our children and what they're doing. We are told by our regulators that the pesticide residues in our food are safe. They're based on good science. The reality is the complete opposite. What farmers use is a formulation of different chemicals as a pesticide. There is one nominated ingredient called the active ingredient that has some testing, and believe me, that testing is completely inadequate. And then mixed into that, there are other toxic ingredients such as solvents. Most of them are petrochemicals, and many of them are carcinogens, and surfactants and other toxic ingredients. It's a cocktail of toxins. And yet the assumption is made that this cocktail of toxins has the same toxicity as the one nominated ingredient. Now, this cocktail of toxins is added to it to make the pesticide more effective, i.e. more toxic. Tell me, what is the logic? How can it be scientifically valid that something is more toxic, is not more toxic? The assumption is made it is not more toxic, so there is no need for testing. That is a nonsense. It's actually a scientific fraud. There is some testing of these formulated pesticides for acute toxicity. In other words, how much will kill you in 2 weeks? I'll say some, not all are tested for this. But that tells you nothing about chronic diseases. Chronic diseases like heart disease, liver disease, cancer, they take more than 2 weeks to develop. There is absolutely no requirement and no testing for the long-term lifetime exposure that all of us get for pesticides. Every one of us has a cocktail of pesticides in our systems. There are thousands of registered pesticides around the world, and these are formulated compounds. Not one is tested. And when we look at things like children's health, which I want to talk more about it, reproductive effects, organ damage, cancer, developmental neurotoxicity, which I'll talk more about, endocrine disruption, which Tyrone will talk about. He's one of the experts on this. Metabolic disruption, epigenetic mutations, and more. No testing. In fact, in the literature, there is only one peer-reviewed paper that tests animals for lifetime exposure at the normal levels that we are exposed at. And this is by Professor Seralini. And this study found that the majority of the treated animals had mammary and other tumours, liver damage, and kidney damage, and it was caused by exposure to small amounts of glyphosate. The amounts that virtually all of us now that we can test for it have in our system, and we're told is safe. These slides here, I just wonder if I'm trying to work out how to use the laser. Okay. You can actually see the areas of necrosis or dead areas, scarring in the tissue caused by exposure. This particular study was actually done on Roundup Ready GMO, Roundup, and then the combination of both, and found that all three caused damage. The pesticide industry, as you could imagine, didn't like this study and did everything possible to suppress it. But it got republished, and this study will always be regarded as a landmark study, a game changer, because it's the first ever done of an actual pesticide that is used over a lifetime at the rates that we are exposed to these pesticides. The other really important issue is children. There is no requirement to test specifically for children. If you look at things like the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Development, their guidelines, which are regarded as best practice for testing, it says use young, healthy adults. So the most vulnerable times of exposure, the fetus, growing children and up into puberty, there is no testing for that. And so the fact is that there is no evidence or no consideration in any of the regulatory process for the special requirements of children. Yet, when we look at the independent peer-reviewed literature, which is ignored by the regulators only look at what is submitted by the pesticide companies, we find the opposite. We find a lot of evidence and that these children are particularly vulnerable to the smallest amounts of pesticides. So in the literature, these are some of the diseases we'll find that minute amounts of pesticides will cause. Lower IQs, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, your autism spectrum of disorders, which is an epidemic, organ damage, kidney, liver, lungs, reproductive tract, autoimmune diseases like asthma, lack of physical coordination, loss of temper, anger management, the whole bipolar schizophrenia spectrum of illnesses, also depression, child youth suicide, which is a major issue. And childhood obesity, we know in part is caused by endocrine disruption from pesticides changing the metabolic processes. This is a graph. I'm one of the co-authors. It's a peer-reviewed paper. And what we looked at is over 20 diseases in the USA that we got the data from the Centre for Disease Control, which CDC, and we track that against the increase in glyphosate, or Roundup, which is increased dramatically in the USA because of Roundup-ready crops, GMO crops. And you can see there the red line is the Roundup, or the glyphosate. And the yellow line is the increase in autism. Generally speaking, when you do a correlation study, it's agreed that correlation is not causation. For instance, mobile phone sales in Finland could track maybe the same way, and we know that they're not related. So, but one of the tools that you use in statistics is, in this case, we call it a Pearson correlation coefficient. And there we look at the probability that they're linked. In other words, one causes the other. What is the probability? And each one of these ones, we selected them because the probability was 1 in 10,000 that they were not linked. That's a very high probability. If we had done this study with a medication, it would have been taken off the market because the probability was so high. But it's a pesticide, they're safe, so we don't need to worry about that. After, we were really criticised by Monsanto and others, this is just, no evidence, it's just correlation, it's not causation, it couldn't happen. Okay, so you've got people saying there's no evidence that glyphosate causes autism. This paper came out not long afterwards, and it shows that the smallest amounts of glyphosate damage the normal development of nerve cells. So that's the control, that's the normal development. This is we're looking at the different divisions or stages as the nerve develops. So you can see it's underdeveloped here with the glyphosate. The next stage, you can see the control developing. And this one here is just starting to catch up to the first stage. And then if we have a look here, we can see that this one here actually hasn't even properly caught up with the second division. In other words, what is happening is that the nerves aren't developing properly. And remember that the biggest bundle of nerves we have is our brain. This is happening in the brains of children, getting small amounts of glyphosate because it crosses the placenta and into the developing fetus at their most vulnerable stage. The really sad thing here is that the effect is not reversible. The only thing I want to say, what we do know now with brain plasticity, that it is possible to build new neurons. These neurons are damaged, but we know by changing, stopping the exposure, and we can build new neurons and help children who have been damaged by this have normal lives. The cancer is another one. Childhood cancer, or all cancers, are growing, and it's an epidemic around the world. All of us lose people close to us who've got cancer. All of us are affected by cancer, either individually or by people we know. Probably the most important report ever done on cancer was by the United States President's Cancer Panel under President Obama. He got over 30 of the world's best cancer specialists together, and they analysed all the data on what causes cancer. And 80% of cancers, actually more than 80%, are caused by environmental factors, lifestyle factors, such as smoking, alcohol, but we also, in this case, they really pointed heavily towards pesticides, radiation. There's a whole range of factors that cause cancer. What should have been celebrated in this is that 80% of cancers we could stop tomorrow by getting rid of these negative environmental factors that cause it. What other medical intervention, public medical intervention, could make such a difference to a major epidemic? We could change cancer tomorrow by getting rid of these factors, but it's ignored. Then we could use the funding to work on the other 20%. We could get rid of cancer as an epidemic. But there's not much money to be made in that, so it gets ignored. I think what is really important here is when we talk about children, we know that children's rates of cancers are increasing. They pointed it out in this study, but also last year the World Health Organization shows that there's a 13% increase. Children's cancers are still increasing, and we have very good evidence of pesticides causing cancers. Going back to this study that we did, we looked at quite a few cancers in the US, and the red line is the amount of glyphosate. The blue line is the increase in GMOs, because these GMOs are Roundup ready. That's why there's so much glyphosate is used. And the green line is what the trend line was, the trend for the disease before the increase in glyphosate. Once again, it's a 1 in 10,000 chance that these chemicals, so that glyphosate is not linked to the cancer. Similarly with this one, the same thing again. You actually have a look at the trend rate on urinary and bladder cancer is actually going down until the introduction of Roundup ready crops and the increase of glyphosate in the food supply. We were criticised for that, but not long afterwards, the World Health Organization comes out classifying glyphosate as the second highest level for cancer. To explain that, the highest level is categorized as level 1, and that is for it's only about 100 compounds where there's a lot of evidence of it causing cancer in humans, like alcohol, tobacco, some of the petroleum products. 2A means the evidence in animals is clear. It's there's sufficient evidence in animals to show that it causes cancer. What it means is it's not, there's limited evidence in humans, but the one it did actually have a lot of evidence was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And there was a court case last week that Monsanto lost where they were sued for causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the plaintiff was awarded just under $300 million US. But so the other one I want to talk about as well is the issue of what we call neurotoxicity, developmental neurotoxicity, where pesticides damage the developing nerves. I showed you the example with glyphosate and how that damages the developing nerves. There's a lot of pesticides that are nerve poisons. Things like organophosphates, the neonicotinoids are, the carbamates, the pyrethroids. They damage nerves and actually damage the development of nerves. And what studies have also found when it comes to children, that there's really no safe level, because as adults we have enzymes in our liver that can actually detoxify small amounts of these chemicals. The fetus and the newborn, young children, don't have these enzymes. In other words, they have no way of detoxifying the smallest amount of pesticides. And so they can be damaged by the smallest amounts. That's what this means. It says, immediate direct effects on neural cell replication. In other words, immediate effects on the growth of nerves. And don't forget that the brain is the biggest collection of nerves. So this is a very good example of this by Dr. Elizabeth Gillette. It's looking at two groups of children in Sonora in Mexico. One group lives in the valley where there's farming and pesticide drift. The other group lives in the mountain where it's still traditional farming and no pesticides. So these are 4-year-old girls. These are the girls in the mountain. They draw pictures of people just as we'd expect 4-year-old girls to draw them. Lovely pictures. Look at these girls, same age. They can't even do anything closely resembling a person. That shows brain damage, and that is because of pesticide exposure. The regulatory authorities and others dismissed it, said, oh, that's anecdotal, that's not scientific. There's no proof pesticides do that. But since then, in the literature, there's a lot of studies now that show very clearly that the smallest amount of pesticides damage the development of brains in children and lower their IQs. One of them tried to find the lowest level, the threshold that was safe, and couldn't find a level that was safe. In other words, there is no level that is safe for children. And I think what is really important here is that most people get their residues through the pesticides in food, and these cross the placenta and affect the growing fetus, the growing baby, and they go through breast milk. So this is an example of one very good study, and where this is an important one is that they're now using much more sophisticated techniques to look at damage. Traditionally, it was done by feeding the animals, then slaughtering them, and then cutting them up and looking at bits of their tissue under a microscope and comparing them. And that still is a valid way of doing it, but it's basically science from the 1840s and 50s. We've actually come along a lot further with science, and you can't really do that with children. You can't really feed them, slaughter them, and then start looking at their organs under a microscope to see what damage is being done. But there are techniques like MRI scans, non-invasive ones, where we can look very clearly and see the differences. So this one here is a very good example of where they've looked at the MRI scans of newborns and actually found areas where there is brain damage. And that brain damage has come from pesticides that have crossed the placenta from the mothers who have eaten what they considered as a normal American diet. It's come through. In particular, in this case, they tested one pesticide, chlorpyrifos, which they've been trying to ban for years. And Trump undid the ban recently, but last week a judge, actually this week I should say, a judge in the US has ordered that the ban be reinstated and that chlorpyrifos is banned. And it's long overdue when you see this. But what I want to say here is, what sort of society are we that we grow food that damages the brains of our children, gives cancer to people? What idiotic society are we? The Romans used to, have lead-lined vessels and drink lead, and of course that, wasn't good for their health, but they didn't know it was damage, that it was toxic. The Chinese used to give immortality pills to their emperors made of mercury. That might have made their bodies immortal because they didn't decay. It didn't give them a much longer lifespan. But they didn't know mercury was poisonous. But we know these things are poisonous. We're using them because they're poisonous, and we're trying to pretend they're safe. When the peer-reviewed science shows it's clearly not safe. And I think the saddest thing I want to talk about this is there's absolutely no need for these pesticides in farming. It's the biggest mythology at all. If we don't have pesticides, we'll starve. It's actually the other way around. If we continue using pesticides, we will destroy our society. What is the future of our society when you saw the increase in autism, increases in cancers in children? What are we doing? We have to change if we're going to survive. This is an existential threat to our existence. And yet, we know enough that we can grow good, healthy food without using any of these poisons. So I just want to go through and just show you ways of doing it, starting with the soil. Soil health is the basis of it all. And most pests and diseases are opportunistic. If you build healthy soils, you heard it yesterday, Hans, healthy soils, healthy plants, healthy people, healthy planet. And I'll give you an example. This is in Ethiopia, and this is wheat grown on compost. This is wheat with chemical fertilizers. Now, they get wheat rust, stripe rust. The composted wheat doesn't have it. The chemical wheat has it. It's the same soil, the same climate, the same level of disease spores. Everything's the same except for one has a healthy soil using compost instead of chemical fertilizers. The chemically fertilized wheat now needs to be sprayed with pesticides. This is something I want to get across. I came across very clearly yesterday, showing how conventional farms have more pests than organic. Spraying pesticides, one, it doesn't really get rid of pests, but those farms have to do it because their plants are no longer resistant to pests and diseases. This particular wheat was sprayed with fungicides. It gave 1.6 tonnes per hectare. There's the extra cost of fertiliser and the extra cost of fungicides for the farmer and a lower yield. The one grown with compost, it gave 6.5 tonnes per hectare. Higher yield, better quality. The other one I suppose I'd like to say, when we talk about healthy soil, healthy plants, which is healthy food for healthy people, if you had a choice, which wheat would you rather eat? This one here or this one here that is sick and has to be sprayed with fungicides? That's the other issue I want to get across. What sort of food are we making in terms of our choices? I think most people prefer to eat that. I'll give you this as an example. This is my own farm. As Dr. Chen said, I grow tropical fruits. One of the fruits I grow is also papayas. And here you see damage from one of our worst papaya pests in Australia, and fruit spotting bug. And for years and years, our farmers fought to keep one of the last toxic organochlorines, the relatives of DDT, called endosulfan, very dangerous chemical. I said it's the only one we can use to get rid of this bug. And if you ban it, we'll go bankrupt. That's what you hear all the time from farmers. I want to show you this. So this here is where it's fixed up. You see the new papayas growing there. It's flowering. Looks really healthy. I didn't spray anything on it. I fixed up the soil nutrition. And the plant has its own defences then. What's really interesting here is that I can actually, the fruit spotting bugs, when they're on the sick plant, are really fast, virtually impossible to get. When they're on the healthy plant, the plant poisons them. And they're slow, I can pick them off. So it means the birds can come in and now pick them off really easily. And that's how, I can have clean, healthy papayas. So we heard a bit about this yesterday and had some really good examples of putting flowers and functional biodiversity into agricultural systems, agroecosystems. And the word which I really like to use is agroecology. You heard Hans talk about it yesterday. We've got to move away from chemical science to ecological sciences, work with the ecology to give us our ecosystem functions. And yesterday was very inspiring, seeing the amount of talks on it. So when we talk about the beneficial insects, the natural enemies of our pests, the reason why we need flowers is that many of them, it's their larval stage that is the predator. And in a lot of cases, the adult stage, they turn into vegans. They live on nectar and pollen. But very importantly is when they emerge from being a larva to become an adult, they actually need the nectar and pollen to reach sexual maturity. If they don't get that, they can't make the next generation of babies. This is really important. So, for instance, in normal farms where everything is sprayed out because it's a weed, if any of these beneficials actually got in there and they did breed, the next generation won't breed because they can't reach sexual maturity. So we actually need them. We need these here to help them grow and become sexually mature and get the next generation. Then what they do, the mother will then lay the eggs on the pest, and then they hatch, sometimes outside, sometimes inside. If you've seen the film Alien, where the larval alien emerges out of the stomach, that's based on these parasitic wasps, these parasitoids. But there are numerous species, such as hoverflies, lacewings, that need flowers. So we put as many flowers as we can into the system. This is my own farm and what I've done underneath. My neighbours think I'm really messy because I'm letting all these uncontrolled plants, but I actually think that looks quite beautiful myself. And most of those are sort of natives. Some I've introduced for ecosystem services. These are different models. This is in the United States where you can actually put barriers of different flowering plants along the sides of your fields. Windbreaks. Another really good way of managing and creating insectaries, is the word we use for these flowering plants, insectaries, is strip mowing. So instead of mowing everything down and in one go, we leave refuges of tall plants, flowering plants, for the beneficial insects. So, for instance, by leaving these refuges, we can double the amount of the beneficials in our system. So in my own farm again, when I mow, I don't mow everything at once. I'll leave these strips like this deliberately as a refuge, as an insectary. Because if I mow this down and mow everything at once, I've destroyed the homes of my beneficials. I want to always have a refuge somewhere for them. So if I mow this, mow that down, leave this. Now this is growing up. At some stage I'll mow that, but I'll have another area here that is growing up. So I've always got somewhere on my farm that is a home, an insectary, full of biodiversity, functional biodiversity that I can use for pest control. And Dr. Chen talked about how I export. I used to export all around the world. I used to export rambutans to Japan. And my rambutans, to go to Japan, they've got to be perfect. Never had to spray because of this. This is an example in Bhutan. And most farms have these sort of marginal areas that people regard as weeds. You can start thinking about redesigning the system. This agroecology is about redesigning to bring in functional biodiversity. And the word, when we use eco-function intensification, is that we want to intensify these eco-functions by bringing in more and more functional biodiversity into the system. So here, you've got different insectary plants. These trees here, they can also be used as fodder for feeding animals. But, as well as bringing in the insects, these are great places for the little birds. We heard yesterday about how good small birds are at, feeding on pests. Also, we know, frogs and lizards. There's so many. We provide a refuge for them. The other one is these systems provide biomass for compost, and which we can actually then use to put on our fields. This is an example in Kenya, where you have these. They have these sort of rows of a mixture of plants, and they do the same thing, provide habitat for birds, frogs, lizards, insects. They also act as barriers. Barriers are a really important thing for pests and diseases. If the pest comes in, most likely it's going to be eaten before it goes out because of all the beneficials in there, little birds and our beneficial insects. It's a windbreak. Believe me, the benefits of windbreaks for increasing crop production are huge. Stock feed, again, it can be harvested. A lot of legumes, a lot of valuable plants in there. Legumes provide free nitrogen, and they actually sustainably harvested as well for compost, but also for biogas, for energy. This is in Sichuan, outside of, a few hours outside Chengdu, based on the old Chinese system. I don't know if people have read Farmers of 40 Centuries. I hope you have, because you guys are in the book. It's looked at traditional Chinese systems and Korean systems and how they've been sustainable for 4,000 years. And this is a very good example. You're leaving all these small little flowering plants that people regard as weeds. The parasitic wasps are very small, and they actually prefer the really small flowers because the bees take the big flowers. They're like bully girls, and they bully the little wasps away. So if you've got these little insignificant flowers that the bees aren't interested in, they're very happy. The other one is that these sort of little flowers that people regard as weeds, they're locally endemic. So they already have their locally endemic parasitoids, beneficials with them. Don't spray them out, don't remove them. They're not doing any harm. And when you look at them as lovely flowering plants, they're absolutely beautiful. Change your aesthetic. It's, But also they planted bamboo along the edge as a barrier for pests. There's so many things that you can do in these systems, and also high biodiversity in the planting systems as well. All of these add up to some of the most highest yielding functions. These traditional systems, 4,000 years old, are more productive than any of the broadacre monocultures in the USA or Australia or Europe. They produce more nutrition per hectare, health per acre, than any other system. I went back a year later there and they'd cleared it all and planting tea trees for tea tree oil because that's a cash crop. They destroyed what, as far as I was concerned, is a highly productive, well-proven system. This is my own farm, and I took this picture because I actually wanted to explain what we're doing with farming. Farming, we're actually collecting solar energy. That's what leaves do. They collect solar energy and convert it into glucose, which is the basic building block of life. And I took this because I just wanted to show what I'm doing here is collecting the light that my cash crop, this is my cash crop, rambutans. And this is light that it's not using. And I can use that light or that energy now for my ecosystem services. This is a legume, and it provides nitrogen. It has flowers that attracts the beneficial insects. It deepens the soils. It brings up trace elements from the soils because its roots go down metres and metres. It works as a good green manure, increases soil carbon. It conserves water. The other thing that these are living mulches. So what did I do then? And what a living mulch is that it shades the ground. So in the dry season, I'm like here, I have a monsoon season and I have a dry season. And having a living mulch stopping the sun from baking the ground keeps the soil moist. And, my neighbours think I'm the messiest farmer, but the fact is, this is what I would call is good ecological practice. I am using every bit of sunlight to power my farm, to give me ecosystem services, so I don't have to use things, chemical fertilisers and pesticides. It's solar energy. This is an example of the same in Italy. And what they're doing here is these are apricots. And the really important thing, once again, is that the cash crop is getting the sunlight first. But here in this space now, and this is the word we use for this really is the cover crop, is using all the sunlight that the cash crop isn't using for ecosystem services. So it's fixing nitrogen and carbon. We can use it as a green manure. Flowers attract beneficial insects, so we get pest control. It's a living mulch, conserves water. It's an example of best practice. And so then we can go an example of what is regarded as best practice in conventional. This is Spain, but if I went to California, my country, this is what I would see. There's this idea that anything that's not your crop is a weed, so you nuke it, get rid of it any way you can. And so you want bare soil, dead soil. So if you look at that, there's minimal solar capture. Most of the solar energy falling on that farm is being wasted. There's no fix of nitrogen or soil carbon, so you have to buy nitrogen, fertilisers to put in. No green manure. Green manure it provides virtually all the nutrients you need, so you've got to buy all your fertilisers to bring into this system. You can't grow it. You can't use solar energy to produce it for free. No flowers to attract beneficials, so what do? You have to use pesticides, don't you? Does not conserve water. The irony here is they tell farmers to do this because weeds take water. It's actually the other way around. That bare soil gets heated up and the capillary action pulls all the water out. You keep the right ground cover, you will conserve water. The systems I showed before conserve water, these lose it. And it's subject to wind and water control. So you look at the colour of that soil, it's lost its topsoil. It's lost all its soil carbon. That's growing in a subsoil. It's lost, the topsoil is where all the fertility is. It's gone. They have to bring in synthetic fertility in forms of chemical fertilisers because this system gets rid of it. It's actually an example of worst practice in weed and soil management, in every bit of management. And yet that is regarded as best practice. Yet this, someone will say, oh, that's full of weeds. She's a really bad farmer. Well, she's actually best practice. This one here is what we need to avoid. And what I want to end on, unfortunately this is corrupted, doesn't matter. What I want to end on here is that we have good evidence that organic yields are higher than industrial agriculture. And for instance, the Wisconsin integrated trials showed that the organic systems, after a few years, had higher yields than the conventional industrial systems. The Rodale farm system trials actually showed up to 30% higher for organic, especially in drought years. This is where they really do well. This one here, Iowa State University, is in bushels, but you can see clearly that the organic always got higher than the conventional. Washington State, the yields of apples were much the same. And I wanted to show you this data from the United States because most people would regard conventional agriculture, industrial agriculture in the United States as the benchmark of a high yield. That's what Hans showed yesterday. That was regarded as the benchmark. But the fact is now with research, we're getting higher yields from our organic and agroecological regenerative systems. And I want you to take note of that because that's one of the things that you can do as researchers, is start putting money into it. As Hans said yesterday, less than 1% of all the billions of dollars put in agricultural funding goes into agroecological systems. And yet with that 1%, we can show we're already getting higher yields. I would argue that the trillions of dollars that have been spent on conventional agriculture have been a waste of money. They're largely subsidised the pesticide and agricultural companies. If we could get a fraction of that money, look what we've done with less than 1%. We increased that to 5%. We would have a highly productive agriculture, much more productive than it is now with no pesticides. Okay, this one's been corrupted again, but anyway, I just want to end on this one here. This is looking at Africa, and people say oh, if we go organic, we won't be able to feed the world. The majority of the people who are food insecure, who need nourishment, live in the developing world. And to give an example of Africa, this is a study done by two United Nations organisations, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and United Nations Food and Agriculture Organisation. And what they did is look at 114 projects on 24 African countries. It was actually 2 million hectares, 1.9 million farmers. And on average, the yields were 116% higher than the traditional systems. I think this is really important to say, taking farmers in the developing world from basically their traditional systems to organic by design, agroecology by design, we can more than double yields. The other really important thing, we heard yesterday that about 75% of the world's food comes from small farmers. In the developing world, according to the Food and Agriculture Organisation, 80% of the food comes from small farmers. 80% in the developing world. We can double that easily with today's technology. What we know now, without any even further research, we can double that. So it's a myth we can't feed the world. We can do it. And I think that's a really important thing to get across. And also because the majority of the world's food insecure people live in the developing world, we need to increase production there, not grow more GMOs in Kansas or in Australia and export it to them. We need to do that locally with their systems and empower them to do it and give them the knowledge. That's really training. It's pretty easy to do and not a lot of money, and we could feed the world. So I suppose what I want to end on is really this again. We've got two pathways. One where we can make a better world, work with ecology, work with the environment, and produce healthy food without any poisons, work with nature, bring in biodiversity into our systems, and be more productive than we are now, or continue down this path and kill our future. honestly, the current path of industrial agriculture is a price we can't pay. I hear people saying to me, oh, organic food is too expensive. Well, how expensive is this? How expensive it is that you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables that are grown conventionally, grown from industrial agriculture, you're thinking you're being healthy, and you're doing this to your children. And all the other diseases that we have. Now in the United States and the UK, life expectancies are going down. So I want to end on this, is that the cost of this is too much. It has to stop. And so what I'd say that going over to organic and regenerative systems, that is our future and that is what we have to do. So thank you.